Hello there. It's John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and I welcome you to Quartet. We come to you bi-weekly to discuss some of the deepest and most significant issues related to this transition to this new world. And I'm joined, as I always am, by members of our quartet, which Gregg Braden. Hello, Gregg. You're in a new location today.
Yeah, John and Penny, it's good to be with you today. I'm coming from a hotel just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. So the camera and internet is not what I'm accustomed to. I apologize in advance, and I'm looking forward to being with you today.
Well, we're glad we caught you on the road. And then Penny Kelly in Michigan.
Yes. Hello, hello. It is good to be here, and I'm really interested in the topic today.
Yeah, well, good.
Yeah.
And sadly, our friend Kingsley Dennis, who's a regular member of the quartet, is consumed by family things, I believe it is this week. So so we're going to do a trio instead of a quartet. So let's move along to our topic of today. Martin Armstrong has suggested that in the first quarter of next year, will be the beginning of what his computer says is World War III. So what in the world does that mean? Well, they make it clear that this is not necessarily a kinetic war where everybody's sending missiles all over the place. This is what they call a hybrid war. A hybrid war is where you have economic and psychological and cyber and everything, a little bit of kinetics, probably, almost certainly. But it is a whole new generation and a whole new idea of warfare or conflict. And you can see that being set up all over the place in terms of the sanctions against Russia and the Russian reactions and so on. And so you can see this moving down, it's over the cliff and headed down into a dysfunctional dystopian, one could maybe say dystopian kind of endpoint. And you ask yourself, then where does that go? And again, Martin Armstrong's computer predicts that in between 2025 and 2027, there is a global civil war. And as I've suggested here before, I didn't know what that meant. A civil war is, everybody knows, it's a national event between two factions within a nation who are trying to, vie for dominance within that environment. And so when the idea of a global civil war shows up, you say, what in the world is that? And it took me a couple of months of thinking about it. And suddenly it came to me that, it's a large scale planetary wide uprising against governments by the people. It's a global war by the people against the governments, against their existing governments. And nothing like that has ever happened before. And you'd say, what in the world would precipitate that? Well, in comes the remote viewers. The remote viewers are these folks started by my friend Hal Puthoff and some others back in the early 70s in the most classified program that the government had at the time, to use psychics to spy on the Soviet Union and Russia and anybody else for that matter. And what they found out is that they could find out all kinds of things, not only of what are going on right now, but what could happen in the future. They could find a submarine at the bottom of the ocean and tell you where it was going to be. They found a crashed airplane in the middle of found the coordinates in the middle of the jungle in Africa. And that's the kind of things that the remote viewers can do. Well, it's unknown whether that program is still ongoing in one form or another. Probably is. There's a group of remote viewers headed up by Dick Allgaier in Hawaii, which are really extraordinary in the way that they do this. And they've had a great deal of successes. And just believe me that they're really quite good at what they did. And so they were targeted. And the targeting, of course, is all blind. It's just random numbers and things. And so the individual remote viewers have no idea what they're looking at. But the target, it turned out to be, was sometime in 2005 to 2025. And in 2025, it was just some date, as I remember it. And they all came back, 4 of them, came back with whatever imagery and other things, and the place was a mess, and it was all going sideways and everything. But the important thing was that 3 of the 4 of them all came back and said betrayal, betrayal, betrayal. All of that came up in their remote viewing of that period of time. And it says that in fact that there was broad-based sense of betrayal against the government, about the government, that the government had betrayed everyone, that they'd been taken advantage of, that in fact the populace writ large had all given their trust to the government, and the government had taken advantage of it. If you start with that possibility, and it's only a possibility, there are other ones, but this is an interesting one. And if you start with that possibility and start looking at it, you say, well, what in the world could generate this broad base of betrayal that would result in a general uprising across the planet?
Betrayal is, I think, one of the sense of being betrayed is it goes directly to one of the most primal instincts I think that we all share as individuals, as families, as communities, as societies and nations. And one of the fascinating things, I've studied this deeply from just a purely psychological perspective. And one of the most interesting things is that once we sense that we have been betrayed in one facet of our life experience from an individual or a corporation or a power structure, we tend to generalize that sense of betrayal, because now we know that the question is, can we trust anything else that you have said? So it doesn't take a lot of betrayal to foster the lack of trust that would lead to the kind of uprising that you're talking about. For it to happen on a global scale, it would have to be about something that has impacted us globally. Up until this point, I think the only thing that would meet that criteria is, of course, the pandemic and the information that we were given that we now know is no longer true, or that we now know is not true. And people acted upon that information. They risked their lives, they risked their children's lives, their families' lives, their career, generations of wealth, generations of family, businesses were all put on the line based on information that was touted as scientific and true. The research papers now are showing, and the testimony is showing, that a lot of that was not true. And the fact that the pharmaceutical companies are in court asking that their trial data not be shared, originally for 75 years, then they came down to 50 years, and Congress is now mandated that I think it's 50,000 pages per month now need to be shared in congressional testimony from Pfizer. I don't know about Moderna, but for Pfizer. That information is now being disseminated, and it is showing where we have been lied to, where the betrayals actually happened. So I'm thinking that it could be something like this is the catalyst. And once that catalyst opens the door to the sense of betrayal, then people of nations would do what individuals in a marriage would do. If one partner in the marriage betrays the other on one level, the question is, can I trust you with anything else that you've said or anything else that you're doing from this point forward or that you've done in the past? So once that betrayal, that sense of betrayal is fostered based upon what happened with the pandemic, I think people will go back and say, well, what else have you told us that's not true? Were we lied to about what's happening in Ukraine to gain our support? And then they go back and they say, well, we know we were lied to about Iraq, for example, and about the premise for why we went into Iraq, and the same with Afghanistan. And so where does that stop? So that becomes a cascade effect where I think the the betrayal leads to such a distrust that the distrust in the authoritarian figures breaks down to the degree that it cannot be repaired. And in the absence of being repaired as it is, something new must emerge. And that's what we're talking about here. One of the things that I found, and this was especially true around the 2012 phenomenon, is that the remote viewers got stuck. They looked in a timeline from where they were into 2012, and many of them said they couldn't see anything beyond 2012, and they interpreted that to mean that the world was ending, or the world, that something bad was happening. And the beauty of what we're doing here in these conversations is that a shift in consciousness that allows for a bifurcation in that timeline, unless the remote viewer knows how to navigate those bifurcations, they're not going to see it. So what they see is what is possible if nothing changes between now and 2025. Conversations like this and many others are creating those bifurcations.
First of all, it's really hard for me to imagine that people are only now beginning to see that betrayal. That's something I've been watching for a long time, years, decades. So there's that, the whole thing about trust. When you watch what has been going on and you look at the reasons, even if it's just speculation as to why would they be doing that, then you end up with a whole array of explanations that are not really good. They aren't very digestible, and they stick in your craw. And that then leads to greater and greater trust, just like Gregg said. What else? What else? And so on and so forth. So it's hard for me to imagine that people are just now, or in 2025, are just going to be waking up to that. So that would be the first thing. I think one of the second things that leads to a sense of betrayal is the number of deaths that we will look back on. And we'll say, when there's not very many people left, what the heck happened? And, people will point to the pandemic and all of that, but when you look at the pandemic, where did that come from? Et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very, very prescient kind of thing that is leading to a sense of betrayal. When you have lost critical people in your family, people that you loved and that didn't need to go, that's really hard to get past. It's hard to forgive. It's really difficult to forget, especially if it's children. And we're embarking on a period of time where we're experimenting with the children. And there's already been a whole lot of other stuff around children. My own personal point of view around Roe versus Wade is that was put into effect so that abortions would be prevalent everywhere, because there was a business to be had in the background from all those dead infants and babies, etc. The sense of betrayal. Why have we not been educated to know some basic science? If you know a little bit of science, you could look at that whole pandemic and that whole story and go, that doesn't hold water. The educational system has been destroyed, in my view, and is continuing to be destroyed at every level, at the scientific level, at the governance level, at the mathematics level, at the level of psychology and reading and understanding and perception. What has happened that education is not educating? So that's a sense of betrayal right there. And then we have, of course, the economy. I think we're headed into a rough period here, and that economic hardship is going to be very, very difficult for some people, and people are going to give up. And it's not, don't give up, people. Get creative instead. Yes, it's their system that's falling. We have options. So that's another thing. And then I think at the psychological level, for a sense of betrayal to suddenly manifest in 2025, maybe not so suddenly if you're looking, but you know, for that to suddenly burst forward, there's going to be this undercurrent of a feeling of guilt on the part of the population as to why did we wait so long to stand up? That feeling of guilt gets projected, and we're willing to take out people that we think are not worth trusting. Governments that aren't working, education systems that are destroying people's minds, medical systems destroying their bodies, etc. The whole thing ends up a mess. And one of the things that I saw with the robes was World War III. And we did talk about it, and they said everybody was fighting everybody. The people who wanted green energy were fighting the people who were freezing to death because of coal or whatever. And so there were all these fights, and I remember there were at least 8 different levels of fighting just between and among the population. As well as people that were fed up with government and banking and thus systems.
Penny, you asked a couple of really good questions. And the first was, why now? You know, why are people only now waking up to this? I've asked myself, you know, the same question. I think there are a number of different reasons, but I think they all feed in under the umbrella of a psychological term. It's called normalcy bias. And in normalcy bias, it is the tendency of the individual to take the rough edges out of the crises of the day and kind of smooth those edges so that we say, well, you know, these things happen and we'll get over a classic. I'll just give you a classic example, a textbook example of normalcy bias was the Holocaust. When in Poland, when the Nazi troops were coming in and they were going into neighborhoods and taking entire neighborhoods, loading them onto boxcars and shipping them off, the people that remained behind could not allow themselves to fathom what they knew was going to happen. So the story that they told themselves with the people in the boxcars were the lucky ones because they were being taken to be relocated to new homes and new neighborhoods and new industries and a beautiful new way of life so that they could get on with their daily lives, bypassing the trauma of knowing what was going to happen. Even though the rumors were out there, they knew these people were going to die. That's an extreme example, but we're living that right now. For example, our administration did a press conference 2 days ago touting how good the economy is.
Yeah.
And how strong the economy is. And people want to hear that. That's their normalcy bias. They don't want to know that we're in the midst of a crash, that a recession is already here, that the dollar is being devalued, that it's been weaponized against other nations, and we are part of that. Nobody wants to hear that.
So then what happens? So if all of these things conspire to generate a sense of betrayal, and you pass over this thing, and everywhere you look and everybody you talk to says, golly, they really screwed us.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
The sense, on a psychological level, the sense of betrayal is so primal that it pushes people to a primal response. And that response is based upon their psychological makeup.
Yeah.
So there is one set of people, one group of people, whether it's the US or whether it's the world, that feels they need a savior. And they will always look outside of themselves for something to sweep in and save them. And it's that sense that makes them very vulnerable to, this is exactly what happened in Germany in World War II, when people were told, surrender your weapons, you don't need them because we'll care for you. Don't worry about the job you lost, we're going to give you a good job. Don't worry about the income, we're going to take care of you. And they said, hey, bring it on. So that's one psychological makeup. And then the other one, and we're seeing a lot of this already as well, are people that have always had a tendency to have less trust in power structures, will go to deeper levels of self-sufficiency. And they'll say, man, we're on our own, got to do it ourselves, can't trust. And they'll go to the extreme. can't trust anybody.
See, one
You
thing
know, I
that,
was-
go ahead, Penny.
I was going to bring up that whole subject of looking for a savior. So let me just build on that. One of my concerns is that people looking for a savior are going to glom on to something ridiculous, or they'll glom on to, you know, people that are just as bad as the people that they're trying to get rid of.
Yeah.
And my other concern is that they will look for the aliens to save them. And that, you know, any one of those three really takes your own power away. Not that I think aliens want your power, but there's a lot of inability to judge, or who can I trust once you've been seriously betrayed. So you make more bad decisions.
Thank you again, both of you, for this delightful kind of conversation. And for those of you who are viewers, let me remind you that we do this every 2 weeks, and we come back, and Kingsley will be with us in 2 weeks, and so we'll have a full quartet. And but this is only one of a number of things that we do here at the Arlington Institute. We have transition talks every month. We have a speaker who wonderful speaker who comes in, and we not only get 100 or 200 or 300 here in Berkeley Springs, but we also live stream. And our next speaker coming up is David Martin, Dr. David Martin, who used to be on my board of directors, and the last time he was in Berkeley Springs, there were 40 of us, and I can assure you there are going to be a whole lot more than that now. And David will be with us on the 23rd of August, and or the 23rd of July, and then Gregg will be with us in September, and Penny was here in the spring, and so on. We got some delightful and very interesting things, and you can find out all of this on arlingtoninstitute.org or transitiontalks.org, and you can find out about more about Quartet and what we've done, all on the website. And so we hope that you'll join us there, and that you'll come back and be a part of all of this, because we're trying to shine a little light on the path ahead, you know, into a whole new direction. And like I said, you don't get there without talking about it and thinking about it. And, you know, these kinds of conversations help facilitate that whole kind of building these possibilities and the options. And so thank you all, those of you who have joined us today, for being with us, and come back and visit us again in a couple of weeks when we get back. And thank you, Gregg, and thank you, Penny, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, John and Gregg and everybody.